The banquet hall glowed with soft chandelier light, the air thick with the scent of roasted lamb and fresh roses. My name echoed through the microphone, followed by the words, Entrepreneur of the Year. I stood, my heart pounding, as applause filled the room. At 29, I'd just been honored by the Denver Chamber of Commerce for building my tech startup from a laptop in my apartment to a company valued at $10 million. I scanned the crowd, searching for my parents' faces, expecting pride, maybe even tears. Instead, I saw their table, empty. My mother's voice rang in my head from earlier that day. We're so sorry, Audrey, but we have to be at Chloe's art gallery opening tonight. It's a big deal for her. My name is Audrey Ellis, and in that moment, standing alone under the spotlight, I realized my parents had chosen my sister's minor event over my life's greatest achievement. The sting of their absence burned, but it lit a fire inside me. They'd ignored my worth for the last time. Life before that night was a tapestry of ambition, quiet resilience, and a longing for connection that never quite materialized. I grew up in a tidy suburb of Denver, where the Rocky Mountains loomed like silent sentinels against the horizon. Our cul-de-sac was a microcosm of middle-class dreams, manicured lawns, kids racing bikes until dusk, the hum of sprinklers mixing with the scent of charcoal from summer barbecues. Our two-story craftsman home stood at the corner, its wraparound porch adorned with my mother's prized geraniums, their red blooms a vivid contrast to the muted gray siding. Inside, the walls were a shrine to my younger sister, Chloe. Her blonde curls and dimpled smile dominated every photo frame, from her toddler years to her high school art shows. I was there, too, but always in the background, a serious girl with glasses, clutching a book or a science kit, my dark hair pulled into a practical braid. My room was my sanctuary, a small space under the eaves where I'd lose myself in coding tutorials or build apps on my ancient desktop, the hum of its fan a constant companion. My days were structured, predictable. Mornings began with oatmeal at the kitchen table, my mother humming as she packed Chloe's lunch with extra care, a heart-shaped sandwich, a note tucked inside. I'd pack my own, grabbing an apple and a granola bar before biking to school. I excelled there, acing math and computer science, my teachers praising my focus. At 15, I won a regional coding competition, building an app that streamlined library checkouts. I remember rushing home, my trophy clutched in my hands, eager to show my parents. They were in the living room, helping Chloe with a school art project, glitter scattered across the coffee table. "That's great, Audrey," my father said, barely looking up. "Chloe, careful with the glue." I stood there, the trophy heavy, my excitement fading. It wasn't the first time, nor the last. I learned to celebrate my victories alone, pasting certificates on my bedroom wall, a quiet rebellion against their indifference. College was my escape. I stayed local, attending the University of Colorado on a full scholarship I'd earned through relentless study, late nights with calculus textbooks, weekends writing essays while my friends partied. I majored in computer science, dreaming of building something that would change the world. My startup, Codinist, was born in my junior year, sparked by a professor's challenge to solve a real-world problem. I created a platform to help small businesses automate their operations, inventory, payroll, customer tracking, all in one sleek interface. I coded in my dorm, my roommate's snores blending with the click of my keyboard. By senior year, Codinist had a dozen beta users, mostly local shops I'd convinced to try it. I graduated with honors, my parents attending the ceremony but leaving early for Chloe's poetry reading. I didn't let it sting. I was too busy pitching to investors, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder, my dreams bigger than their approval. At 27, I secured my first major funding round, $2 million from a venture capital firm that saw Codinist's potential. My life became a whirlwind, meetings in sleek downtown offices, coffee runs to fuel 16-hour days, late-night debugging sessions when a line of code wouldn't cooperate. My loft apartment was my haven, its exposed brick walls lined with bookshelves and potted ferns, though the chaos of startup life meant takeout containers often piled up on the counter. My best friend, Lena, was my lifeline, dragging me to taco trucks or trivia nights when I forgot to breathe. "You're married to your code," she'd tease, tossing me a napkin as salsa dripped on my shirt. I laughed, but I loved it, the grind, the challenge, the feeling of building something from nothing. I sent my parents money regularly, covering Chloe's art supplies, their car repairs, even a vacation they took to Santa Fe. I told myself it was family duty, that they'd see my worth eventually. I'd invite them to my office, show them Codinist's dashboards, but they'd smile vaguely, their minds already on Chloe's next project. I kept pushing, believing one day they'd look at me the way they looked at her. The signs of their favoritism were like pebbles in my shoe, small but impossible to ignore. Family dinners were Chloe's stage. She'd talk endlessly about her latest painting, her plans to study abroad, her vision for an art collective. My parents leaned in, their eyes bright, hanging on her every word. I'd try to share, a new client for Codinist, a feature we'd launched, but their responses were perfunctory. "That's nice, Audrey," my mother would say, her fork pausing before she turned to Chloe. "Tell us about your mural." I'd clench my napkin under the table, the dismissal cutting deeper each time. When I was 23, I won a regional tech award, a sleek glass trophy that felt like validation. I invited my parents to the ceremony, picturing their pride. They promised to come, but an hour before, my father called. "Chloe's having a crisis with her art portfolio. We'll make it up to you." I sat alone in the audience, the trophy cold in my hands, their absence louder than the applause. It wasn't just ceremonies. Holidays revolved around Chloe's whims. One Thanksgiving, I drove 3 hours from college to join them, only to find the menu tailored to Chloe's new vegan phase, my favorite dishes nowhere in sight. I didn't complain, but the oversight stung. At Christmas, Chloe's gifts were lavish, an easel, imported paints, while I got a generic scarf, the kind you grab from a clearance bin. I thanked them, my smile tight, and tucked the scarf in a drawer. The worst was 2 years ago, when I secured Codinist's $2 million investment. I drove to their house, my heart racing, ready to share the news. They were in the dining room, planning Chloe's gallery opening, papers and sketches spread across the table. "We'll celebrate your thing later," my mother said, not looking up. I stood there, the words auteur, Audrey Ellis, the words echoing in my head. I left without a word, the rejection of familiar ache. Another time, I overheard my father on the phone, bragging about Chloe's genius to a colleague, describing her as the family's shining star. My name didn't come up. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my boots, and cried for the first time in years, the weight of being invisible crushing me. I tried to bridge the gap. I invited them to Codinist's office, showing them our sleek workspace, the humming servers, the team I'd built. They nodded politely, but their questions were about Chloe, her latest exhibit, her travel plans. I sent them articles about my work, hoping they'd read them. They didn't. Lena noticed the pattern, her voice sharp one night over margaritas. "They treat you like a bank, not a daughter," she said. "When are you going to call them out?" I shrugged, avoiding her gaze. I wasn't ready. I still believed I could earn their pride, that one big win would make them see me. But the banquet hall changed everything. As I stood under the spotlight, the empty table a glaring void, the truth hit me like a freight train. They'd chosen Chloe's Cafe showcase over my Entrepreneur of the Year award, a moment I'd worked a decade for. The applause faded, and I knew I was done waiting. That night, the banquet hall's glow felt like a mockery. I accepted the award, my smile practiced, my speech about innovation and grit delivered flawlessly. But inside, I was unraveling. The absence of my parents' table was a wound, raw and bleeding. I shook hands with industry leaders, posed for photos, and answered questions about Codinist's future, but my mind was stuck on my mother's voice. "Chloe's opening is a big deal." A big deal. Her event was a small display at a local coffee shop, thrown together in weeks, while I'd built a company that employed 50 people, served thousands of businesses, and earned national recognition. The unfairness seared through me, a fire I couldn't douse. I drove home, the award plaque cold on the passenger seat, and sat on my couch in the dark, the city's hum a distant pulse outside my window. I wanted to call them, to scream, to demand why Chloe's half-finished dreams always mattered more. But I didn't. I'd spent my life begging for scraps of their attention, and I was done. The hurt was a living thing, clawing at my chest, but it wasn't alone. Guilt gnawed at me, whispering that I was selfish, ungrateful. They were my parents. They'd raised me, clothed me, cheered at my science fairs, hadn't they? Maybe I was expecting too much. Maybe I hadn't explained Codonist well enough, hadn't made them understand its impact. I paced my loft, the hardwood creaking under my steps, my thoughts a storm. I replayed every missed milestone, every dismissive comment, every time I'd swallowed my pain to keep the peace. I thought of the $20,000 I'd given them over the years, loans for Chloe's art classes, their car payments, a new furnace when theirs broke. I'd justified it as duty, but it was more than that. It was a plea for their love, a currency I thought would buy their pride. And still, they'd chosen Chloe. I stopped pacing, my reflection staring back from the window, the city skyline a glittering backdrop. The guilt began to dissolve, burned away by a clarity I'd never allowed myself. I wasn't the problem. I'd built an empire, earned scholarships, mentored my team, all while carrying the weight of their neglect. They didn't see me because they didn't want to. I opened my laptop, the glow harsh in the dark, and pulled up Codonist's financials. The numbers were staggering, revenue doubling yearly, a user base growing exponentially, a valuation that made my younger self's dream seem small. This was my proof, my worth in black and white. They could ignore me, but they couldn't ignore this. I wasn't a child anymore, desperate for their approval. I was a woman who'd changed the world, and I'd make them face it, not for their love, but for my own peace. The next morning, I woke with a purpose that felt like armor. The pain lingered, a dull ache, but it was fuel now. I poured coffee, the scent grounding me, and opened my email. There it was, buried in a thread with Horizon Solutions, a major tech firm we'd been negotiating with for months. The email outlined a $15 million partnership to integrate Codonist's platform into their global network, a deal that would catapult us to new heights. My eyes caught on a clause, a personal guarantee from me, as CEO, to oversee the integration. It was a formality, but it was power. My parents didn't know about the deal. They barely knew Codonist existed, despite my efforts to share. But Horizon's CEO, Karen Patel, had mentioned wanting a human story for the press release, something to make the partnership resonate. An idea sparked, bold and unyielding. I thought of the family dinner my parents had insisted on for the coming weekend, a rare event to catch up. Chloe would be there, no doubt basking in their attention. I'd always been the quiet one at those dinners, letting her shine while I faded into the background. Not this time. I decided to turn that dinner into my stage, not to beg for their pride, but to show them what they'd overlooked. I called Karen, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. What if we announced the deal at a family event? I asked. It's personal, authentic, and it'll make the story unforgettable. I explained my vision, a surprise announcement, a photographer to capture the moment, a press release that would tell the world my story. Karen was intrigued, her tone warm. I love it, Audrey. Your journey is what sold us on Codonist. Let's make it happen. I hung up, my heart racing. The twist? I wouldn't tell my parents or Chloe. Let them think it was just another dinner, another chance to fawn over my sister. The days before the dinner were a blur of preparation, each step a thread in the tapestry I was weaving. I met with Codonist's PR team, a small group of sharp minds who'd become my second family. We drafted a press release, crafting a narrative that traced my path from a college coder to a tech leader, emphasizing the grit and vision that secured the Horizon deal. I spent hours refining it, choosing words that felt true, not boastful. Audrey Ellis built Codenist from her dorm room, overcoming countless obstacles to create a platform that empowers small businesses worldwide. It began. I wanted the world to know my story, but more than that, I wanted my family to hear it. I reviewed the Horizon contract with our legal team, ensuring every clause was ironclad. The personal guarantee was my ace, tying the deal to me alone. My parents wouldn't expect it. They'd never asked about my contracts, my deals, my world. I also met with David Nguyen, a lawyer I'd worked with on Codenist's early contracts. Over coffee, I explained the $20,000 I'd given my parents since college, loans for Chloe's art supplies, their mortgage payments, a trip to Santa Fe they'd called a necessity. I'd never asked for repayment, assuming it was my role as the responsible daughter. David listened, his expression thoughtful. "You've been their safety net," he said. "But you're enabling their favoritism. A formal repayment agreement could set boundaries without malice." I hesitated, the idea foreign. I wasn't trying to punish them, but I was tired of being their bank. I nodded, authorizing him to draft a plan, modest monthly payments, no interest, a way to reclaim my agency. "It's not about the money," I told him. "It's about respect." He smiled, understanding. By the time I left his office, I felt lighter, the weight of years of unspoken expectations lifting. I spent the evening before the dinner at Lena's apartment, sprawled on her couch with a glass of wine, the city's glow filtering through her windows. She'd been my rock since college, the one who saw through my family's neglect long before I did. "You're finally doing it," she said, raising her glass. "No more playing second fiddle." I laughed, but my stomach churned. "What if they don't care?" I asked, the fear slipping out. "What if they just shrug?" Lena set her glass down, her eyes fierce. "Then you'll know, Audrey. And you'll move on. But they won't shrug. You're about to drop a bombshell, and they're not ready for it." Her confidence steadied me. I went home that night, laying out my outfit for the dinner, a tailored blazer, a nod to the CEO I'd become. I wasn't a child seeking approval anymore. I was a woman ready to claim her space. The night of the dinner arrived, and I drove to my parents' house, the Horizon contract tucked in my leather bag, my nerves a live wire. The familiar craftsman loomed ahead, its porch lights casting a warm, deceptive glow. Inside, the dining room smelled of my mother's pot roast, the table set with the same chipped plates we'd used since I was a kid. Chloe was already there, her voice bright as she described her latest project, a series of abstract paintings she hadn't finished, her enthusiasm filling the room. My parents hung on her words, their smiles wide, barely noticing my arrival. "Audrey, you're here," my father said, glancing up from his plate. "Grab a seat." I smiled tightly, setting my bag by the door, the contract a quiet promise. Chloe launched into a story about a gallery owner who'd discovered her hands waving dramatically. I listened, letting her dominate, my silence deliberate. The air felt heavy with the weight of years, her spotlight, my shadow. Dinner progressed, the clink of forks and Chloe's chatter the only sounds. My mother asked her about a potential art residency in Paris, her eyes sparkling. My father nodded, suggesting they could visit her there. I sipped my water, the knot in my chest tightening. I'd been to Paris last year for a tech conference, a trip I'd funded myself, but they'd never asked about it. I waited, biding my time, my pulse steady despite the storm inside. Halfway through the meal, the doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected. My mother frowned, confused, as I stood, smoothing my blazer. "I invited someone," I said, my voice calm but firm. I opened the door to Karen Patel, Horizon's CEO, and her photographer, their professional attire a stark contrast to the cozy dining room. Karen's presence was commanding, her smile warm as she shook my hand. "Audrey, this is perfect," she said. The photographer sat up discreetly, his camera ready. My parents exchanged puzzled glances, Chloe's fork pausing midair. "Audrey, what's this?" my father asked, his tone wary. I didn't answer, turning to Karen instead. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I wanted to share this moment with my family." I faced them, my bag in hand, my heart pounding but my resolve like steel. "I have an announcement," I said, pulling out the contract. Coden has just signed a $15 million partnership with Horizon Solutions. It's the biggest deal in our history, and I wanted you to be the first to know. The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling like dust. Chloe's jaw dropped, her eyes wide with disbelief. My mother's hand froze on her glass, my father's fork clattering to his plate. The photographer snapped photos, the soft click punctuating the moment. The silence stretched, taut and electric. My mother recovered first, her voice trembling. 15 million. Audrey, that's incredible. My father nodded, his expression a mix of shock and hesitation. We had no idea you were doing something this big. I held their gaze, my voice steady, each word deliberate. I know. You've never asked about my work. You've been too busy with Chloe's art shows, her trips, her dreams. I've built something that changes lives, employs dozens, and reshapes industries. And I'm done letting you overlook it. Chloe scoffed, crossing her arms, her tone sharp. This is dramatic, Audrey. It's just a dinner. Why are you making this about me? I turned to her, the years of resentment spilling out, my voice calm but cutting. Just a dinner. Like the awards ceremony you skipped for your gallery opening. Or the investor meeting you didn't show up for because you needed a ride. I've spent my life in your shadow, Chloe, and I'm stepping out of it. Karen stepped forward, her voice smooth but authoritative. Audrey's leadership is why Horizon chose Codenist. Her vision, her perseverance, it's what makes this partnership extraordinary. We're announcing it tomorrow, with photos from tonight, to tell her story. My parents' faces shifted, a mix of awe and discomfort, their usual confidence unraveling. Chloe's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of unease, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I pulled a folder from my bag, David's repayment plan, and handed it to my parents. This is for the $20,000 I've lent you over the years, I said. I'm not your bank anymore. If you want to support Chloe, do it yourselves. My mother's hand trembled as she took the folder, her eyes wide. My father's mouth opened, then closed, no words coming. The photographer kept shooting, capturing their shock, their realization. I didn't wait for their response. I thanked Karen, shook her hand, and walked out, the cool night air hitting my face, the mountains dark against the sky, my chest lighter than it had been in decades. The aftermath was a storm I'd anticipated but couldn't fully prepare for. The press release went live the next morning, splashed across tech blogs, local newspapers, and industry newsletters. Denver entrepreneur seals $15 million deal at family dinner, one headline proclaimed, accompanied by photos of me at the table, contract in hand, my parents and Chloe frozen in shock. The story went viral, shared on social media with captions like, "From overlooked to unstoppable," and "This is how you make a statement." My inbox flooded with messages, congratulations from colleagues, interview requests from journalists, notes from strangers inspired by my journey. Lena texted me a screenshot of a tweet, "Audrey Ellis just dropped the mic on her family. Icon." I laughed, but the victory was bittersweet. I'd wanted them to see me, but the public's gaze added a weight I hadn't expected. My parents called repeatedly, their voicemails a chaotic blend of pride and defensiveness. "We're so proud, Audrey, but you didn't have to make a scene," my mother said in one, her voice tight. "We've always supported you," my father claimed in another, the lie almost laughable. Chloe's texts were sharper, dripping with resentment. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." "Thanks a lot, sis." I didn't respond. Their words couldn't reach me anymore. The story spread through our community, neighbors and family friends whispering about the dinner, asking why my parents had missed my award ceremony, why they'd relied on my money while praising Chloe. The social fallout was swift. My mother's book club stopped inviting her, their curiosity about the tech star daughter outweighing their loyalty. My father's golf buddies ribbed him about missing the boat on Codenist. Chloe's gallery opening, I learned, had been a dud, 5 attendees, no sales, her paintings gathering dust in the cafe's back room while my deal dominated headlines. Professionally, I soared. The Horizon partnership launched seamlessly, Codenist's platform integrating into their network with glowing reviews. We hired 20 new staff, moved to a larger office with mountain views, and rolled out features that doubled our user base. I started mentoring young women in tech, hosting workshops at local colleges, sharing my story to show them what's possible. But the success came with challenges. The spotlight brought pressure, every decision scrutinized, every milestone expected to top the last. I worked longer hours, my loft a mess of coffee mugs and notepads, my sleep fractured by stress. Loneliness crept in, too. I missed the family I'd once dreamed of, Sunday dinners, holiday traditions, a connection that didn't require a contract to be seen. Lena was my anchor, hosting game nights with our friends, dragging me to comedy shows, reminding me I wasn't alone. "You're building a new family," she said one night, passing me a slice of pizza. "And we're better than the old one." She was right, but the ache lingered. I grappled with guilt, too, wondering if I'd been too harsh. Had I humiliated them needlessly? Should I have confronted them privately, given them a chance to change? But then I'd remember the banquet hall, the empty table, the years of being invisible, and the guilt would fade. I'd given them countless chances, invitations, updates, loans, and they'd chosen Chloe every time. The dinner wasn't revenge. It was clarity, for them and for me. My parents tried to reconnect, sending awkward emails, inviting me to dinners to talk. I declined, keeping my distance. They'd need to earn my trust, not demand it. Chloe's career faltered, her art relegated to a corner of my parents' garage. She moved back home, her dreams of Paris abandoned, working part-time at a boutique. My mother called once, her voice soft, almost broken. "We didn't realize how much you'd done, Audrey. We're sorry." I listened, my throat tight, but I didn't forgive, not yet. Words weren't enough. They needed to change, and I needed to protect my peace. Financially, they struggled. David's repayment plan forced them to budget, cutting back on Chloe's endless projects. My father took a part-time consulting job, grumbling about tight times. My mother sold her antique furniture, a sacrifice she'd once called unthinkable. They made their first payment, $500, a small step but a start. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their world was shrinking while mine expanded, a poetic reversal I hadn't sought but couldn't ignore. Socially, they faced ostracism. My cousin emailed me, describing a family reunion where my parents were grilled about my success. "Everyone's talking about you," she wrote. "They're embarrassed they didn't know." I felt a pang of pity, but it passed. They'd built their cage, and I wasn't unlocking it. A year later, I stood in Codenist's new headquarters, a sleek building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Denver's skyline. We just launched a new product, a mobile app that streamlined invoicing, pushing our user base past 100,000. I was preparing to speak at a national tech conference, my keynote titled, "Building Value, Building Self." My parents sent a card, a simple note of congratulations, but I didn't invite them to the event. "Chloe," I heard, had taken a job at a cafe, her art a hobby now, her confidence dimmed. I didn't revel in their struggles. I didn't need to. My life was full, new friends who celebrated my wins, a team that trusted my vision, a purpose that woke me up each morning. I visited my old cul-de-sac one evening, standing outside the Craftsman, the geraniums still blooming on the porch. The house looked smaller, its glow faded. I thought of the banquet hall, the empty table, the moment I chose myself. I hadn't just made them see my worth. I'd seen it myself, and that was the true victory. What do you do when the people who should love you most let you down? You build a life so bright they can't look away.